This session will provide insight on how the CPG industry's approach to e-commerce and digital channels has changed over time, as well as some key benefits to adopting an omnichannel approach and best practices for overcoming an organizational and operational challenges when establishing or expanding an omnichannel presence. And now, I am thrilled to introduce our guests today. Athina Kanioura and Matthew Piazza, welcome. And if you will indulge me for a second, I think we'll get you guys on camera. There you go, excellent. If you indulge me for a second, I'd love to share a little bit of your background and bios with our guests. They're quite impressive. Athina is the Executive Vice President, Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer at PepsiCo. I think she's going to be on screen in a second. There we go. Excellent. Where she oversees their end-to-end strategy to win, both as a total company and in key markets, including their digitalization strategy. She also leads a company-wide transformation, ensuring that their scale is leveraged as they focus on accelerating profitable growth and identifying areas to cost efficiency and optimization. In addition to, she also oversees data products, platforms, and talent. Before joining PepsiCo, Athina was the Chief Analyst Officer and Global Head of Applied Intelligence at Accenture, where she specialized in applying AI and analytics to drive business value. Welcome, Athina. And our friend Matthew from Mastercard is the Global Consumer Goods and Grocery Segment Lead for Mastercard Data and Services. Matthew has over 10 years of experience in the CPG industry, most recently at Google and previously at Danone and at Keurig Dr. Pepper, where he worked in brand and product management roles. Thank you, Athina and Matthew, both for joining us here today and to share your expertise with us. The floor is now yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Mario. I really appreciate it. And Athina, really excited to be here with you today. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to be here with us.
Thank you, Matthew, and a pleasure to be with everyone, including, of course, kind of our audience.
Awesome. And so I think what would be really interesting to do is to kind of start at the beginning, right? We're here to talk about omnichannel commerce and tips and tricks and sort of best practices for consumer goods companies, but curious to kind of start with an understanding about when and why did PepsiCo first start expanding from more traditional brick and mortar sales into sort of these omnichannel and digital commerce arenas?
Yeah, of course. PepsiCo's journey has been, I would say, probably in a parallel pathing to majority of the CPG companies, right? So our journey starts around 7 years ago, where we thought, the consumers become much more omnichannel. They want more options. They want optionality both when it comes to portfolio, but also optionality when it comes to time of day purchase and proximity, and much more personalized experience. And at that moment in time, of course, as you know very well, retailers had already started kind of working on the direct-to-consumer ecosystem. Our equivalent of our direct-to-consumer, but only from a customer lens, was our B2B commerce strategy. So 7 years ago, we started with our e-commerce strategy. What does it mean? Of course, with our biggest geography, North America, which accounts for a good chunk of our business in the organization, but also has the highest complexity from a portfolio perspective. And as everyone else, kind of the first, I would say 1 or 2 years were the years of understanding what should be mission critical, what should be the specific brands that we should funnel through our e-commerce strategy, and what does it mean in terms of how cannibalization affect to our brick and mortar business. Of course, COVID changed that altogether, right? We've cut plans, we threw away the plans, we threw away every strategy we've had, and then we had to go deep into implementation phase, where we went from, I would say, probably an MVP and gradual acceleration of e-com to a massive industrialization and operationalization of the capabilities, and all capabilities around e-com, everything from consumer journey mapping to performance marketing to building a a world-class platform to be able to support it, data pipelines, infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And within that as well, within COVID, we also had to change our business models because now we had to create APIs with our retailers, with our third-party aggregators. So within a 3-year period, we probably accelerated the journey that maybe would have spanned 7 to 8 years, right? So we cut the time by half, at least by half, if not more than that. And now I would say we are in the reflection point. And I'm trying to be slightly philosophical on that as well, because e-com has now evolved to a much more omnichannel commerce ecosystem, right? Which has social commerce, it has the components of D2C, it has what kind of some countries call virtual commerce. So how do we piece all those elements together in the next generation of commerce strategy? So we are extremely happy with, the journey we have embarked on. I think in our industry, we are considered to be best in class in terms of the capability we have, and we work also with a broader ecosystem of partners, external partners that we have, our retailers, and our aggregators, to be able to evolve the thinking moving forward.
No, that's great history and detail. And I think, your experience over the COVID time period is certainly something that I'm sure a lot of our guests here today can hear and commiserate with. It was certainly an unexpected impact to a lot of organizations and certainly accelerated a lot of companies' moves into the e-commerce landscape and to omnichannel shopping. I know you touched on a little bit there that you sort of saw a rapid acceleration. You saw sort of 8 years of growth in 3 years. What were some of the things that Pepsi accelerated as a part of this to enable that transformation?
Yeah, and I'll start with the basics, foundational components. There was definitely an acceleration of our infrastructure. Suddenly, if you expected volumes X and you go to 3X or 4X or 10X, that assumes an infrastructure. An infrastructure, I think everyone understands, an infrastructure on the data, an infrastructure on the API, an infrastructure on the applications, an infrastructure on the visualization, on the insights, et cetera, that wasn't planned for to start with. So suddenly we had to double and triple down on building a foundation which is strong enough. Otherwise, we would have, very, very kind of important performance issues, right? Imagine if our customers were, or our partners were ordering through our platform and we were connecting, and suddenly the systems would go down. This wouldn't be the best experience. So one is the investments of the infrastructure and what we had to do differently around that. The second, along with that, is to connect it, of course, with the broader ecosystem of PepsiCo. Because as we were evolving in our thinking and accelerating, especially our big customers were doing the same. So if you were to read all the earnings of the big retailers, their growth and their growth also in the future is coming from e-com, right? So how are you able now to link your omnichannel ecosystem with their omnichannel ecosystem? And because they also had to embark on a journey with brick and mortars becomes, I would say, probably, especially COVID, declined or exterminated in some cases, and everyone went online, and now it's back to more stabilization. So this adaptation, we have had to do it along with our partners. I would say that is the third component. The third one is talent. Sometimes we talk about e-commerce as if it's just a technology. No, it's a big, big business model change plus a big, big talent play. We have had, as a company, to adjust to talent and experiences that a traditional CPG wasn't used to, right? Suddenly people needed to understand, okay, what does a digital marketing experience person have to do? Comparing to a more traditional brand marketing person. right? When we say a digital product manager, how is that different comparing to a traditional product manager of PepsiCo? So we had to introduce terms and careers and talent in the organization that was bespoke, new, I would say more exotic in the beginning. So that by itself accelerated also the broader digital adoption of the organization, where it instigated a series of career mappings, career opportunities, and now went beyond the traditional digital space that most of the CPGs were going, but they were more vertically integrated through the implementation of the e-commerce ecosystem. So I would say technology was one, the ecosystem acceleration was the other one, and the people agenda was the third one.
No, and I think it's super critical that you mentioned people, right? I think it's such an overlooked component of some of these transformation efforts. I think we often focus on the platforms, the infrastructure, which is all very critical, but without the right people to optimize the performance of it, you're really going to be, not able to take full advantage of the underlying infrastructure that you've created. I know that you mentioned a little bit, partners and some of the partners that you've had to work with and partner with as retailers have also had to navigate this, complicated ecosystem and landscape. How has it impacted some of, the traditional grocery space in your mind, with the rise of these third-party delivery apps and click and collect with retailers having to do both brick and mortar and online sales? How have you seen the grocery landscape change, and how had Pepsi sort of had to change along with it?
I'll start a bit on how we like to start in PepsiCo with the consumer. I think the whole change was delightful for the consumers. Finally, the consumer has a lot of choices, as I would say, much more visibility on what is available out there, and therefore they can get what they want, everywhere at any given point in time. So let's start with that. And for us, that's always a big win, because that means availability of our products anywhere, everywhere, and at any point in time, 24/7. So de facto for any CPG, that's dream come true, right? Suddenly you don't have to go to the store, from 8 to 9, but you can buy our products 24/7, right? Availability, huge upside from an incrementality, right? So big incrementality. With that, though, lies a lot of complexity. The complexity for us and our partners, whether it's the click and collect from any grocery perspective, whether it's through our own platforms or through aggregators. And the complexity lies with supply chain. It doesn't lie with the consumer value proposition or the A&M that comes with that. The fulfillment component of e-com, the 24/7, number one, is off the charts, right? Especially if you want to do same-day delivery or 1 hour delivery or half an hour delivery, and it's extremely costly. So you need to have DCs very close to the end point. You have to think of last mile delivery. Do you do it yourself, or does someone else do it for you? So we have had to redesign with our supply chain teams the whole network from scratch. So you have some echo, I'm not sure where it's coming from. So everything from scratch, kind of the last mile being very closer to the consumer, to the end point or to the collection point. We have had to rethink of our infrastructure from a packaging lines, because some of our products were moving much faster than before, right? How do you readjust within the manufacturing facilities, not just the warehouse, now the frequency? And what does it mean from a TE, through efficiency from our lines? And how do you also do that in an optimized and cost-effective way without, blowing the bank and our margins that come with that? Because at the end of the day, we also have to be accountable with our shareholders. So the biggest complexity has and still is the fulfillment component. And I think we, as many other CPG companies, have become smarter and smarter and smarter to be able to prioritize which products are being served by which channel, at what level of frequency, what should be the full value offering, how do you leverage the tail of the portfolio versus the core of the portfolio, the hero SKUs versus much more kind of the bespoke, customized SKUs per channel. So the complexity has given us opportunities for innovation. So I'm flipping it. So this is where I believe, and I know because I'm talking to many of my peers, PepsiCo and many others probably created the best and most powerful pipeline from an innovation portfolio. Why? Because now you could create SKUs for one channel. Why? Because someone wants premiumization, someone wants personalization, and they're willing to pay that at a higher price comparing to getting that in their local market, right? So I believe the cost pressure unleashed growth opportunities. And therefore, if I were to think of that broader ecosystem, for us as a CPG industry, for us as PepsiCo, it allowed of expansion of categories, right? It looked for adjacencies within the categories, right? It's now kind of pivoted a lot of the thinking around bundles, right? Which historically was very, I would say, traditional in terms of the design. Now it's like bundles around moments that matter, bundles around every single occasion that the consumer is engaging, and at the same time allowed retailers, right, to tap into markets and consumers that historically they wouldn't tap to, and they would only engage through the digital first retailer, so the Amazons of the world, right? So it also pushed Walmart, it pushed Kroger, it pushed Target to move much more aggressively to the grocery space compared to what they would have before, because they understand the pressures of winning over consumers that historically wouldn't have gone to the stores.
No, I think that I really loved, Athina, in your answer there, how you started with consumers, right? I think that's so central to a lot of what consumer goods companies do, is really emphasizing and focusing in on that consumer closeness. And it's certainly something that we've been helping other companies with when it comes to personalization and how we can tailor those experiences to the unique purchase attributes of various consumer groups. Curious actually to know a little bit more about Pepsi's approach to consumer closeness, specifically as it relates to first-party data. First-party data is central to creating those personalization opportunities. How has this shift to omnichannel commerce enabled first-party data collection, and what is sort of Pepsi's overall approach to first-party data?
Yeah, wonderful. And as I said, I think at least for us, I'm going to speak on behalf of PepsiCo, we started with much more kind of the traditional B2B commerce. I think at that moment in time was the critical need, right? And gradually we started to move from B2B to B2B2C. And definitely in the past 18 months, I would say we are doubling down on direct to consumer. Now, why is this important and what does it mean from a data perspective? I mentioned before that consumers want choices, want options, but also they want to find SKUs and portfolio bundles that they would find only if they engage directly with us, right? Because the economies of scale are not there if they go through aggregators, or, we want to use it also as a testing vehicle for anything we want to launch in the market. So 18 months ago, we said, okay, we need to invest heavily on creating one consumer data platform for the organization. So we are in a global rollout of a CDP platform that will allow us now to connect all our consumer data in one single data lake within the company, which is actually fully integrated with our enterprise data foundation, right? Because then we'll allow, whether you go from the product to the consumer, or you go from the consumer to the customer, whenever you can make this connectivity, or if you consumer down to R&D, now to have an interconnected data ecosystem. So by end of this year, we will have CDP up and running in pretty much every single market that PepsiCo operates. That's kind of fact number one. Fact number two is already we have in certain markets that we have had the implementation already, consumer and loyalty and reward platforms in place. And we see huge uplift in markets like Turkey, in markets like Mexico, in FLNA, in our Frito-Lay business, right? Where now we can create much more personalized experiences to our consumers that go beyond just the product. As I said, it's the bundles, it's the multi-packs, it's the merchandising, right? I mean, it's linking it with big entertainment events, sports events. So kind of it's the whole proliferation of how PepsiCo operates. Why is this important? You could say, okay, fine. I mean, everyone does it. For us, it's important for two reasons. One is because we have some of the most beloved brands in the world. And I'm not just saying because we are PepsiCo. I mean, think of Lay's, think of Doritos, think of Cheetos, think of Gatorade. It's like, okay, top 10 brands in the world, we are in the top 10 brands of the world, right? Pepsi. So consumers expect that they send a letter, they text, etc. We respond because they want the next flavor, they want the next packaging, they want the next experience. So this immediate personalization is something that they expect from a company when they buy our products, and their products are in every household. So that's number one. Second is because it is important from an R&D. Sometimes we think at things in a bit of a disconnected and a siloed way. For us, as we inform formulations, we start with the consumer. So if I'm not able to understand what the consumers want, I'm not able then to create Dinamita, right? Why? Because they want flaming hot on everything, right? They will not be able to have the same crunchy taste in Cheetos. Why? Because they want even crunchier Cheetos. So this is where consumer sentiment, consumer listening, understanding the consumer attributes and linking that with the product attributes from an R&D perspective is becoming very critical. So for us, it's the way now, and what we are doing is linking PLM, our product lifecycle management, where our product attributes are sitting, with our CDP, with our consumer data platform. So now we have an ecosystem of interconnected use cases. That's the second component. And the third component, we have a notion, since some people know us from our beverages business. I mean, our foods business is bigger than the beverages business, right? So, and we are the biggest farmers, the biggest farming agro company in the world, in reality, taking into account, what we procure from a, PC potato, right? From a corn, from oils, etc., etc. So we also, for us, is a way to communicate back to our consumers what is our strategy when it comes to agriculture, what is our strategy when it comes to sustainability and sustainable farming practices, what is our strategy when it comes to regenerative agriculture. So we use this consumer engagement in three ways. One, as I said, is informing our product roadmap, delighting our consumers with an end-to-end value proposition, and informing our consumers with our strategy about how we are changing the environment, our climate commitments, our sustainability through better farming practices through those type of platforms. So we use it as an educational layer as well.
No, that was really well said. And I think I found it really fascinating to hear how you're taking consumer sentiment and linking that to product development. And then ultimately, through this more agile, direct-to-consumer process, being able to test and iterate on those new product developments, those new product innovations. I think one of the things that we're seeing as a trend within the consumer goods landscape is this focus on testing and learning, doing small market pilots, even releasing things exclusively through e-commerce channels to gain insights and recommendations on how they can expand or how companies can optimize the distribution of new products. That's something that we've worked with a number of different companies on as a part of Mastercard. But I do want to touch on something that you just mentioned there at the end in terms of how you communicate with consumers. communicating about your sustainability mission. How has the rise of omnichannel and sort of this shift to digital commerce impacted your marketing mix, your marketing channels, and the way that you ultimately engage and interact with consumers? Have there been new marketing channels that have opened up as a result of these efforts?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think everyone did a big pivot on the digital marketing channels, right? If you were to see the mix between traditional above the line versus more the digital channels, disproportionately we are investing more and more on the digital channels. And that is a proliferation of digital channels, right? I mean, market by market, there are distinct differences. There are some global platforms, of course, we are using, but there are distinct differences because the ecosystem of China, as an example, is very different from the ecosystem of UK versus the ecosystem of the US and Mexico. So I would say the differences lie in two things. The differences, one is on the technology. So we are very careful as we are thinking of those channels. What are the technology constraints that we have? Because in some cases, those channels are closed ecosystems, right? If you were to think of China and more the Ali closed ecosystem, there are interdependencies on how you promote, advertise, and engage, and then activate through these ecosystems, versus the US, where those ecosystems are much more open, right? So you have a lot of third-party aggregators, platforms that you can build on top of each other, so you can have channels on top of channels. That's what I'm trying to say. We see big trend shifts, right? So, and we see those trend shifts coming from the East. So we see an explosion in more and more markets of social commerce as a platform of advertising, which, as you know, is very, very different from the traditional kind of B2B commerce or even D2C. So which is very fast pacing, and it's like I feel sometimes like I'm in a real-time auction with social commerce. So that is becoming very pervasive in the east part of the world, and the trend we see already is coming to the west. So there's a big watch out for, I would say, everyone, and we are engaging, many CPGs are engaging, but that's one of the channels from the future of commerce that we are looking into more and more. I would say the traditional digital marketing providers are also evolving their thinking, right? And they evolve the thinking. One is out of necessity because there is pressure on the, I would say, broader advertising cost, but also because of regulation. What we will see more and more with the new AI privacy laws that will come into fruition, right? Starting from Europe, some markets already are starting to activate. US is thinking about that. And then that linking with data privacy, GDPR, where it exists, or data privacy laws in some other cases, it will be harder and harder to engage with the consumers in a simple opt-in, opt-out way, right? Because even if the consumer opts in, from an engagement perspective, there is certain information that by those specific acts, either the Digital Act or other data privacy acts, you still will not be able to collect. And I'm not even saying about host. I'm talking about collect and throw, not even collect. So the channels of engagement will have to change their tactic on how they engage with us, so push insights and then not host data. So then how do we keep a track of consumer changing behaviors will be extremely hard. So for us, one thing, we are constantly monitoring the evolution of the channels that we engage in, especially in the digital space, right? The second is how regulation is changing that blueprint, and then what do we do to be able then to map back to the consumer value proposition.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think one of the things that I'm really glad that you touched on too is just PII and privacy. I think that that's something that, as with Mastercard, we've been working with a lot of clients on, enhancing their customer data sets, and privacy is certainly central to a lot of the concerns that we're having. And so I think I'd love at this time to kind of move into some of the questions that we've received from, the audience here. And I think, one that kind of pops to the top here that I'd love to get your perspective on, Athina, is, are there any early downsides of this omni-channel approach or strategy based on your experience? Or have there been any negatives? I've talked about a lot of successes here today. What are some of the downsides that you've experienced as part of Pepsi?
Yeah, I mean, of course. Let's start with that. We wanted to excite people that this is the future. We didn't want to say everything is rosy, right? So as an example, and I did mention it before, the complexity of supply chain has been amplified to the nth degree. So the downside, if you don't find the right partners to create this complex network, or you actually don't spend CapEx to create this network yourself, there is a chance that you will be left behind. So you have to be very smart, depending on the size that you are and the investments that you can afford, to be able to create a backbone from a fulfillment perspective that doesn't compromise your margin targets as an organization. And at the end of the day, our shareholders and the investors will reward you not just because you have a great omnichannel strategy, but this omnichannel strategy cannot be diluted to your profitability. So one is, and watch out, profit dilution. Right? That's a big watch out. I would say the second big watch out is too many, and now I'm calling it kind of rationalization in the traditional world, is simplification, right? Consumers want options and choices, but consumers also want simplified ways of engaging with the companies. And sometimes we get entangled into so many details, but reality, what you want to do is make it simple for a consumer. And a consumer, and many of you are talking to consumers, say, what? I absolutely have a preference when it comes to one channel, right? It's like, yeah, I would like to engage in all, but 95% of my interactions is typically with one channel. So create for me the superior mono-channel experience, but allow me to have this optionality of the other choices. So be smart about your investments depending on the consumer cohort. In reality, a certain consumer cohorts want mono-channel experiences, and these need to be superior in terms of service. So make sure that you don't forget that while you are building for your omni-channel environment. And that's a big risk as we're thinking of the proliferation of consumer segments that now we want to attack, especially the younger segments who are definitely mono-channel because they want to engage only digitally.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think what you're saying too here comes back to one of the things that you mentioned earlier, which is that consumer closeness and putting the consumer first, making sure that you're prioritizing the channels that each consumer cohort feels are the most valuable, interacting with them in the ways that they prefer to be interacted with, whether that's receiving a coupon and a circular flyer or as part of their integrated retailer app. We have an interesting question here, and I'm going to use it because we have a QR screen here on the QR code here on the screen, and so I'm curious. What are your thoughts on utilizing QR codes on packaging, shelf talkers? Is that something that your team is exploring? And if so, what type of content or experiences are you hoping to unlock or link with these QR codes?
A wonderful question, actually. We, and I don't know how many of you have been in the Consumer Goods Forum last year, PepsiCo presented as part of the consortium of many CPG companies, what's the future of QR code as a standard industry process, so we can move more to EM tracking. Remember, it's like we have SKUs, now we're thinking, okay, what could be the evolution of the SKU, going down to EM codes for some reasons. One is full traceability from source to shelf. Right, so we use our QR codes to be able to track our products, right, from the raw material, right, down to where it's consumed, depending on the channel. And we have that in, I would say, majority of our markets. I mean, and we are in full implementation in some other markets that we don't have it. It also sets the standards in terms of the product attributes. we are a global company. I think we have many people in global company. We have very tight standards when it comes to the quality controls of our products, right? And we have to abide with, of course, all the different regulatory bodies that apply in all locations. So a very detailed description of the attributes of the products is something that is actually a requirement for many of the markets. So in some markets, the QR codes go down to that level of attribution for visibility perspective. And the other reason why we are using the QR codes is also for our sustainability commitments, especially I would say scope 1 and scope 2. So we are tracking it also to ensure that we use it as an additional source of data when we want to report out scope 1, scope 2. So that is more, I would say, the classical uses, but very important because we all have to do it. It becomes more and more of a requirement. If you ask our marketeers and my D2C team that is working with our marketeers, they want to use QR codes, of course, for consumer activation and consumer engagement, right? And we have done also kind of what is the future of QR codes linked with NFTs. So I would say two thoughts from my side. One is that the industry is moving to a much more standardized of using QR codes from on the packages. On how we track the portfolio end-to-end, as I said, from source to shelf. And that is something that hopefully we can shape our future as CPGers through that process. And the second, as I said, for more consumer activation marketing practices.
No, that's really interesting. And it's great to sort of get your thoughts on how QR codes can help track and monitor different data throughout the process. I think one of the things that we have a question on here in the chat is, speaking of different metrics and different tools, has the shift to omnichannel or e-commerce platforms impacted the metrics that you're prioritizing, the KPIs that you're trying to track? Are you looking at things differently or evaluating different metrics like customer lifetime value?
Yeah. Yes. The short answer is yes. Right. I would say the bigger answer is those CLV metrics need to translate to any company to financial performance metrics, right? So the thing we have done is from an operational KPI, CLV is a big operational KPI that we have added in our arena, but it's not just CLV, right? CLV, when you think of CLV, many folks think present customer lifetime value. We are also tracking future customer lifetime value, especially if you want to link it with kind of product roadmaps and future consumer value propositions. And within that, we break it down to different types of purchasing patterns and KPIs that link, as I said, to the different consumer journeys and portfolio choices. At the end of the day, the one thing that we are tracking, which is additional, is incrementality, right? I think we like to aggregate things. I like to de-average things. So if we were to think of omnichannel, I'm tracking channel attribution and consumer activation and CLV through each of the channels. And then is there an amplification, then metric, if you were to combine all those channels together, that link to an even bigger incrementality? And this is actually something that we are sharing, not just internally, but also to our board as when we are thinking about omnichannel consumer experiences.
No, I think that's a great point. I think especially on the value of the incrementality, I think that's something that, we've been helping customers understand the value of the incremental, not only like marketing tactics and channels, but in additional like SKUs, how are these products being in incrementality to their portfolio. I think Mario's on here to tell us that we are at time. Is that correct here, Mario?
That's unfortunately true, Matt. Athina, Matt, this was terrific, excellent, and thank you both again for joining us today. I hope everyone got a lot out of this. I know I certainly did, and thank you, Mastercard, for your continued support of Consumer Brands Association. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, and I hope to see you all at the next Industry Insights session coming up soon. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Athina. Thank you, Mario. And thank you, everybody else who is here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Appreciate it.